Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into South Korea's demographic meltdown. We're talking about a crisis so severe it actually threatens the nation's entire future. But, after years of just free fall, something really unexpected has started to happen.
So, let's just jump right in with a pretty surprising question. For what feels like a decade now, the story around South Korea's population has been nothing but bad news, just relentlessly negative. But could that story finally be changing?
And this is the number that's got everyone talking, 0.81. See, after nearly a decade of just falling and falling, the fertility rate is actually projected to have ticked up in late 2025. Now look, it's a tiny increase for sure, but it seems to be fueled by a post-pandemic marriage boom, and honestly, it's this rare little glimmer of hope. But here's the big question, right? Is this a real turning point, or is it just a temporary blip? To even begin to figure that out, we really need to understand the whole picture. We're going to look at the shocking depth of the decline, the perfect storm of pressures causing it, the ticking clock of what happens next, and finally, the absolutely desperate search for a solution.
Okay, first things first. Before we get too carried away with this newfound optimism, we have to put it in context. Because this little glimmer of hope, well, it's set against the backdrop of one of the most dramatic demographic collapses in modern history. Seriously. Check out this number, 0.72. This is what set off alarm bells all over the world. Back in 2023, South Korea hit the lowest fertility rate ever recorded for any country. Just to give you some perspective, a nation needs a rate of 2.1 just to keep its population from shrinking. And, this crisis didn't just pop up out of nowhere. It was a long, steady, and then accelerating slide over generations. I mean, think about it. From a post-war baby boom where women had an average of 6 kids, the rate dropped below replacement level back in the 80s, and it's basically been in a nosedive ever since.
This table here really breaks down why that slide happened. At each stage of South Korea's incredible, rapid economic development, new pressures were introduced. You had urbanization, more women entering the workforce, financial crises, and now this intense burnout culture and an impossible housing crisis. Every one of those things pushed the birth rate even lower.
And this is so much more than just a story about numbers and charts. It's a massive cultural phenomenon. The pressure got so intense that it literally created a new term, the Sampo generation. It describes young people who basically feel forced to give up on 3 things: dating, marriage, and having kids.
And that really brings us to the heart of the issue. This isn't about one single thing. It's a perfect storm of these intense, overlapping pressures that make raising a family feel, like an impossible choice.
I mean, just think about the pressures we're showing here. It is a recipe for absolute burnout. You've got a relentless work culture, some of the world's most expensive housing, an education system that demands huge amounts of private investment, and on top of all that, deep-seated gender inequality. It all comes together to create an environment where there's just no time, no money, and no energy left for kids.
Okay, this number it's just staggering. It really quantifies that crushing financial burden we were just talking about. Raising a child in South Korea costs nearly 8 times the average person's annual economic output. By a huge margin, that makes it the most expensive place in the entire world to be a parent. It's wild.
So, in response to all these pressures, and especially the unequal burden that falls on women, some pretty radical movements have popped up. The 4B movement is a direct protest. It's where women choose to completely opt out of relationships and having kids as a powerful statement against what they see as a patriarchal society. This quote, which we pulled from an online discussion, just captures the feeling of desperation perfectly. It shows you that there's this widespread belief that the system is just so fundamentally broken that only something radical and disruptive, like a total housing market crash, could possibly create the conditions for real change. So what happens when a country's population goes into this kind of freefall? Well, the consequences, they aren't abstract or some far-off problem. They are societal, they're economic, and they are incredibly severe.
This projection right here is genuinely alarming. By 2060, almost half the entire population will be over 65. Meanwhile, the working-age population, the people who support everyone else, is going to shrink to just a third of the country. I mean, that creates an almost impossible strain on pensions, healthcare, and the whole economy.
Right, so this isn't just a social issue, it's an economic time bomb, ticking away. With the workforce expected to literally be cut in half, economists are predicting the country could face decades of negative growth. We're talking about a permanent recession that would threaten its status as a global economic powerhouse.
This chart really puts the whole crisis into perspective. I mean, yeah, other developed nations like Japan and the US are facing their own demographic issues, for sure. But South Korea, it isn't just low. It's in a category all by itself, a truly extreme global outlier. So, how is the nation responding to all this? Well, after officially declaring a national demographic emergency, South Korea is, understandably, scrambling for solutions to pull itself back from the brink.
And let me be clear, the government hasn't been sitting on its hands. It has thrown hundreds of billions of dollars at this problem since 2006, offering all sorts of cash incentives and subsidies. But, and this is the key part, these policies have largely failed because they just didn't get at the deep-rooted cultural and economic problems.
So now, experts and policymakers are arguing that these small fixes, they're just not going to cut it. What's really needed is a complete paradigm shift, a fundamental restructuring of society itself to make it more family-friendly, from the work culture and housing all the way to the hyper-competitive education system. And these proposed solutions, they require tackling some really deeply ingrained issues. To fill the gaps in the workforce, South Korea might have to overcome a pretty strong cultural resistance to immigration. And to deal with military shortages, it's leaning heavily into technology, accelerating plans for an army that relies on AI and robotics.
Ultimately, what's happening in South Korea isn't just a local story. It's a powerful and honestly, maybe a frightening case study for other developed nations that are starting to face their own demographic headwinds.
This quote really captures the main takeaway here. A country's demographic path, it's not set in stone. But ignoring the warning signs and failing to build an environment where families can actually, thrive is just a recipe for disaster. So in the end, this whole story leaves us with a question that goes way beyond South Korea. That little recent uptick, it does offer a sliver of hope. But the underlying challenge, the fundamental problem, it's still there. And it's forcing every modern society to look in the mirror and ask itself, how do we create a future for the next generation?
Subscribe, like, and share.